Hello, general psychology students. So this is the second video covering the personality chapter, chapter 11. We're in the first chapter of unit 2. And so unit 2 will include this personality chapter, the abnormal psychology chapter, chapter 15, and the treatments, chapter 16. So in the first video, I was going to say last class, but first video, I talked a lot about Freud's theory because it is just so fundamental, foundational to understand psychology, even though at this point in time, we really don't value his theories that much because they're not testable, which makes them unscientific. Now, in today's video, I want to talk about trait theorists. When you read the chapter, you're going to see that after they talk about Freud's theory and some of what came after him under still the psychoanalytical or psychodynamic model, then there was a group of learning theorists. Now, those learning theorists, I'm going to talk about more when we get to the learning chapter, which is part of unit 3. So we'll get to that soon, but not in this unit. And then they talk about the biological theories. And then in those, I think you can understand from reading the textbook. So I'm going to, in this video, really talk about the trait theories, okay? So let me call up the PowerPoint slides. Here we go. And as you know, these PowerPoint slides are available to you in your course content folder. In the Unit 2 folder, if you scroll down, it'll say PowerPoint slides. And then if you click up for Unit 2, if you click on that, the first one will say Chapter 11. And we're about 3/4 of the way through the slides. So the trait theorists and theories are going to focus on the types of behavior that people oftentimes do. They're like characteristic ways of behaving. And they thought that this would be a great way to be able to identify people's personalities. So what they were trying to do is say that, certain people tend to share all of these different behavioral traits or behaviors. We're going to call that a trait. And we're going to say, okay, some people are, for example, shy, and they're going to have these behaviors. Much in the same way that we say someone is a cold, what we mean is they have a stuffy nose and a cough, and maybe they have a temperature, maybe not, a little bit of a headache, maybe a scratchy throat. So a cold is just a way of identifying all these different symptoms. Well, a trait is a way of identifying behaviors that a person is likely to have. So one of the first trait theorists was Gordon Allport. He looked through the English dictionary, found 4,500 words that described a trait, puts them into 3 categories, and you can read more about his theory in the book or look more on YouTube videos and such about him. But that's sort of where trait theories sort of start. Then Raymond Cattell comes up with 16 factors that he believed were really, really good at identifying people's traits. And when I was sitting where you were sitting, so this is quite some time ago, but it was very common for employers to give people the 16PF, which came from Cattell. It was a survey, and it would let employers know 16 characteristics or 16 personality traits that their employees were likely to have. And some employers would make hiring decisions based on this information. So for example, one of the characteristics, I believe, was talkativeness. Well, if you were hiring a salesperson, talkativeness would be a desirable trait. So you might need someone who's going to be high on that trait. Other theorists that came along were the Isings. And oh my goodness, this was really an awesome theory that came out. Let me show you, there's a picture of them, but let me show you the theory. So they believe that basically a lot of our personality comes from our biology, basically on 2 different traits: how introverted or extroverted we are, and how neurotic or stable we are. And they believe that both of those things had a biological basis. So the idea was that we have an optimal level of arousal. Everybody does. We have an optimal level of how aroused we want to be in order to function well. Does that make sense? The idea was that extroverts are born with a less than or lower than optimal level of arousal. So internally, left to their, like if you put them in a room with nothing else there, they are not aroused or stimulated enough. So they seek out environments that are arousing, stimulating to bring them up to that optimal level of arousal. So extroverts love being at parties and social engagements where there's lots of people around, um, roller coaster rides and amusement parks, concerts where there's flashing lights and loud music. They might like to go skydiving, and they like to be out and about where there's lots of stuff going on because they're always seeking to increase their level of arousal. Introverts, on the other hand, are born with higher than ideal levels of arousal. So they're, if you put them in a room alone, they're too aroused. And so they're always acting to calm themselves down. So they're going to seek out soothing music. They might want to sit by a beach and read a book with the water lapping, listening to the waves lap against the shore. So they'd prefer a candlelight dinner with soft music playing rather than loud music with flashing lights like the extrovert would like. They're going to prefer environments with fewer people where things are less chaotic and more calm because they're trying to lower their internal level of arousal to make it ideal. Okay. Similarly, Isings believed that there was a predisposition, a biological factor that affected how stable versus unstable your emotions were. In other words, how neurotic you were. And so they believed that with these two characteristics, extroversion, introversion, and unstable versus stable emotions, you could really see where people were and describe personalities pretty well. And so they did a great job. Everyone loved Ising's thing. But then came the big five. And this is the behavior, the trait theory that has sort of taken over all the trait theories now. The big five factor model is just phenomenal at explaining people's personality. And there's a link in the supplementary materials where you can click and take the big five personality test for free. And you can find out exactly where you are on each of these things. Sometimes the acronym that's used is OCEAN, like in this, your textbook did that. Sometimes it's the acronym that's used is CANOE. It doesn't matter which acronym you use. It basically says that there are 5 big traits. And it's important to me that you not only know the 5 big traits, but that you become very familiar with the 6 sub-traits in each of the 5 traits. So there's 30 sub-traits. And so there is a video that's a YouTube video that's shown after this that tells you about the big 5, but also goes through each of the sub-traits. It's really important that you watch that. I know it's 20 minutes long, and that's kind of a long time, but it's really important that you watch that because in watching that, you will better understand each of the 5 big traits. Until you've heard the sub-traits that make them up, you can sometimes be misled about what the traits mean. It will be a very good investment of your time to listen to the 20-minute video, because after listening to that 20-minute video, and it's not me speaking, it's a YouTube video, but after you listen to that 20-minute video, I think you will have a really good idea. Like you won't even have to study it. You'll know it. What openness means, what conscientious means, what extroversion means, what agreeableness means, what neuroticism means, which are our big 5. So let me give you an overview. And after I give you this overview, please, this video is shorter than some of the others. Please go to the next video, the big 5 video with the traits and the sub-traits, and watch that. Okay, so here are the big 5. So one of the characteristics is how open you are. And so on each of these characteristics, you can go from very low to very high, or you can be somewhere in the middle. And if you understand where someone is, like high, medium, or low, in all 5 of these traits, you can really do a good job of predicting their behavior. And so it's a really great way for us to predict what people will do. And so we're going to call this their personality. Does that make sense? It is very important that you not see these as value judgments. So sometimes people will go, well, it's important to be open. Well, in certain circumstances, people who are high in openness, open to new ideas and being imaginative and creative is going to be very useful. In other areas, it's not. And so I want to pull out a value judgment out of this. So we don't want you to be high in conscientiousness or high in extroversion or high in agreeableness or high in openness or high in neuroticism. And you are what you are. And then depending upon the situation that you're in, your personality will be a good match for that situation, or it might not be. So so let's go through these in turn. So the first one is openness, has to do with how open you are to new ideas. So if you're someone who's very structured and everything needs to go in a certain order, then you're probably going to score lower in openness than someone who really, really likes to see what's out there and look at things from different perspectives and really wants to understand the world in a very global way. So that's your openness. The next one, and they're not in any order, but the next one is conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness is interesting because conscientiousness is a good predictor. People who score, the higher you are in conscientiousness, the better you tend to do in your career. So people who are higher in conscientiousness tend to be promoted more and are more successful in many careers. Now, not every single career, but the majority of careers, conscientiousness is going to be a real advantage for you. One of the studies that I find so fascinating is they asked people to create a video describing, telling a story and describing a little bit about themselves. And they had not Cameron students, but college students watch the video. And after watching the video, they had to predict what the person's score would be, whether they were low, medium, or high in openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Other college students were shown the person's dorm room. So they were able to go into the person's dormitory, go into their room and just look at their stuff. Never met them, have no idea who they are, but look at their stuff. And then after looking at their stuff, I think they were given 5 or 10 minutes in the dorm room. It's the same amount of time as the video. Then they were to rate the person in low, medium, or high in openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. And interestingly enough, people who looked at the dorm rooms were much more accurate in predicting someone's conscientiousness than watching them in the video. And some of the other traits were the same way, that actually looking at someone's dorm room, you can get a pretty good idea of what their personality might be like in a lot of areas. So conscientiousness is sort of like what you think of when you think of conscientiousness. It's how good is the person at dotting every I and crossing every T and being careful and competent and self-disciplined. Are they going to put off gratification? If they have a deadline, are they going to do their work and then go out and have fun rather than having fun and then squeezing how much time they have left to study and whatever time is left? So conscientiousness. The next is extroversion. So we talked a little bit about extroversion when we were talking about Ising's theory. So extroverts tend to be outgoing. They enjoy being with larger groups of people. They like being the center of attention oftentimes. They seek adventure a lot of the times. Introverts prefer quiet, more calm environments. They can be seen sometimes as reserved. There's a great TED Talk out there, and I'm going blank on the woman's name. It's Susan something. And she wrote a book about how our culture really loves extroverts, that oftentimes our job situations are set up to favor extroverts. But she reminds us how much introverts help our society run. When I think of an introvert, like the stereotype of an introvert matches my stereotype of an accountant or a librarian or things like that. But so it's not like extroverts always do better. But in the TED Talk, she speaks about, and I'll make sure I put in the supplementary materials. She speaks about going to camp, and when it was time to go to bed or right before bed, she took out her books to read because she was an introvert and her parents were introverts. So what did they do for fun at night? They'd all sit in a room and read, and they'd all be together, but they weren't talking, they were reading. And so she sat, like it was time to close to bedtime. So she read, she's reading, and her, camp counselor comes over, and it was like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And let's get peppy and be excited. And she was like, I'm having a great time. And so that's your introversion, extroversion. And some people, you can be in the middle of these things too. And next is agreeableness. So people who score high on agreeableness oftentimes are very interested in therapy. The skills of a good therapist go along real well with someone who scores high in agreeableness. They're helpful, they're trusting, they're very empathetic. People who are lower in agreeableness are more critical. They're a little bit suspicious of people. And so they're less agreeable. Does that kind of make sense? And the last one that we'll talk about is neuroticism. And neuroticism is exactly what you think of when you think of someone who's neurotic. So if you score high in neuroticism, you tend to be more anxious. Oftentimes you can be happy. You might be prone to negative thoughts. You are more, your emotions tend to go high and low, where people who score low in neuroticism tend to be more calm and steady, and they don't have the high highs and they don't have the low lows. They're just more even. But you are going to learn so much more about each of these traits by learning about the 6 subtraits that make up each trait. And I don't want to repeat what's going to be in the next 20-minute video. After you watch that 20-minute video, it's a YouTube video, and you can see the 6 subtraits that make up the trait. That's the best way to really get a feel for what these traits are. It's the culmination or the combination of the 6 subtraits. Okay. And then take the big 5 personality test for yourself for fun. You don't have to do it for this course, but I think it's great fun to know who you are. I think it's fun to have your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your best friend take it, your parents, and get a sense of if you've got conflict in a relationship, sometimes you'll be able to see where it pops up. Like it turns out your mom is really extroverted and you're really more introverted. And your mom, the place that you have conflict is your mom wants you to go out with her more. And you don't like to be out and busy and doing things as much as she does. And so her understanding that you have more need, you need more calm and less structured activity might help the 2 of you get along better. So, all right, don't forget to watch the next video. I will see you next week for week 6 when we'll be talking about abnormal psychology. Okay.